Okay, so I will have to use a microphone. I hate microphone. I've been doing theater for 3 years, not to use microphones, but too bad. So, hello everybody. Today we'll be working on Symfony Security component. That's an interactive workshop with a lot of examples, so let's get started. First of all, who I am. I'm a software engineer. I've been a consultant for a long time. So I've been doing training, consultancy, industrialization, lead developer sometime, etc. I'm based in Switzerland. So it means that I've got a little bit of French accent. I've got also some German accent, and I got a cold last week. So it can get pretty bad. If you cannot understand me, that's fine. You just ask me, no offense taken. I get that. I put the link of my blog below. I'm trying to blog a lot, especially about Symfony and domain-driven design, or at least a pragmatic approach to the domain-driven design. So you can go and stay in touch that way. You can also find me on Twitter, the small yellow chick. And I put the web SC hashtag. I'm fine if you take pictures during the workshop, if you tweet. Actually, that's nice because, for the event, for Evo, it's good to have some publicity of the event. So you can take pictures, especially maybe during the quiz. And there is the events app for comments. So if you like or if you don't like the workshop, please leave a comment. Feedback is really important to improve after. If you're just happy about it, well, it's really nice to read. That's a workshop where you will be working a lot. I don't know if it is the it in Croatia or not, but I was feeling like, I will let people work. So I will ask a lot of questions, give you some exercises, and I prefer you do those in pair or by 3, up to you. But I see you are a table of 2 people. So I will ask you to do some pair programming, mostly. I think that's how you get the most from the exercises. And if you have any question, anytime, just go ask. That's fine. So let's get started. Who already used security component in a way or another in Symfony? Like having used, okay. Who ever used the security annotation and know what it is? Well, you can raise your hands and, okay. And who did a security guard authenticator? 3 of you, okay. And who did a firewall factory? That was the thing before guard. No one did security with the Symfony 2. You are lucky. That was really complex. And among those who used Symfony Security component, who ever hated it? Like saying, it's not documented, it's too hard to use. Someone? You all love security? Cool. Okay. And last thing, you were all to Nicolas' workshop about dependency injection. And everybody, you are fine? Okay. Pick up. Yeah. You had some coffee after the lunch? I could not find some coffee. That's really hard. Hope to get some after. Okay. So a quick plan of the workshop. We'll start by authentication, then move to authorization. So we'll see what it is. That's pretty common topics. But something a little bit original. We'll see that you can do some stuff beyond those 2, the Symfony Security component. That's the third part. We'll do a code kata. Some of you are used to code kata. Those are just coding exercises. So I think it will be about the last hour, last 45 minutes. We'll give you some clues about what to do, and you will be able to then all work on those, and I will pass by to answer your question or to coach you. And last thing, a quiz, where you can win some amazing prizes. Wait for it. And I will be using those small stars for difficulty. So the goal is to go from really easy stuff to the complex stuff at the end of the day. So let's get started. First thing, so the ones which are alone, if you can please move to be 2 on table of 2. So we had some odd number, so maybe have also a group of 3 person, maybe if we can stick to tables. And you start the virtual machine and you run those commands. So you go to the folder of the application, you do git pull because I push some new code, composer install because there was a new Symfony version. You have to migrate database, load fixtures, copy a file. You should have test passing. And if you do Symfony serve, you should get that nice application. So please get started on those. And if there is any issue, I'm passing around. So I'm getting that everybody has some issue when cache clear. But does it prevent you to go to the app? Or is it fine? So can you get to that page or not? No? I will show you a workaround. So actually, I had to crash the app because I wanted to show you something. Maybe let me get a bigger screen. So is it better? Can everybody see code if I'm doing some code up there? Is it readable? OK. Then please go to security YMA if you get some issue. And you have to, hold on. OK, so to get around the issue in the application, please go to config, packages, security, YMA. And you should have that. And you can uncomment or remove those 3 lines. There with admin, pattern, and then it goes. If you remove those 3 lines after composer install, everything should be working fine. I crashed the app last night voluntarily so I could debug and show you how it's done. Yeah, sure. Everybody is good with those 3 lines? I will move back to the slide. And everybody, please run PHP unit. Please run test, because you will be doing some testing later. And the first time you are running bin PHP unit, it needs to download some vendor, etc. So please run bin PHP unit. OK, perfect. So let's continue. We can have a look at the beautiful application we have. So there you get, it's a small, let's imagine a small blogging application. You have some blogs. So Websam account official blog. There you have articles. We can see some article. And you can edit a blog or edit the article. So for now, everything is open, nothing secured, and that will be what we'll be working on. There is also some admin, which is pretty much the same since nothing is secured for now. Login is not working. And you have a small API, which also is totally open over the internet. So let's get started about the first part, which is authentication. Authentication is the part about who you are, about Symfony forcing people to log in, to know who you are, what's your identity. Authentication is the part about who you are, about getting some identity. The first thing we will need for authentication is to get some users. So we'll be using the Maker bundle. Everybody already used the Maker bundle with the Symfony 4, or is it something new to you? Everybody did? Okay. So we use the first command up there, make user, to create some user class. So please run it. So you want some entity stored with doctrine. You want an email property. And you want a password. It will be asking you some question. Okay, so after everybody has some user entity, that's good. After having the user entity, we will edit the blog entity. So if you didn't know, you can also use Maker Bundle to edit entities. So you type make entity blog, and you will be able to add some new properties to a blog. So let's add an owner property, which will be a minute one to user. I advise you to make it unidirectional. So the last question will say no, and nullable. That's fine. Once you did that, as usual, you have to make migration and to run migration. Okay, I will move to the data features. If you have an issue with some constraint issue while running migration, that's fine. We will fix it. Next slide. So let's have a look at the code. So now you should see that your security YML was modified. You have new block there. We will go into more details after. You have a new user entity with ID, mail, roles, password. And you see that it implements user interface. And that's the important part. Every user class to be used with Symfony Security component has to implement user interface. For instance, if you use a first user bundle, you will extend first user bundle user class, which implements that interface. We need now to modify data fixtures, but then there is a trick. Our user, they have some hashed password. We are not storing clear text password. So Symfony has a really convenient service for that called user password encoder. So you can modify app fixtures that way. You just ask for that service. With auto wiring, it will give you the service. And then you create the user. So that's the code you should have in the application, Romaric, new user, etc. You encode a password for that user. So tell no one is my password. And then you can set password over that user. So please set a password for the two users of the application, and also set an owner for blogs. Every blog should be owned by someone. So on blog, you have to do a blog set owner and pass a user. So modify those, and then you can reload data fixtures, and now it should be fine. And you will have more data. So are there still any issues? All good? We'll have a quick look at the code. So I'm opening my data fixtures there. And for every user, I'm encoding a password, setting the password. And on each blog, I'm setting an owner. Do not forget that part. Is it big enough, really? I think it was bigger before. Everybody can read? Okay. You have better eyes than me, even with my glasses. If you get lost among what we did, you are not sure you have the correct code, you can git check out the first branch. That way you will get exactly the code I have. So there are no issues. And just something to remember, we'll see again later. For the user password encoder, you see that we pass it the user object. We'll see why a little bit later. There I was showing you some issue, but you all got that issue at the very beginning of the workshop. So the point is that right now you cannot access the admin because you don't have any firewall over the admin. So you don't have exactly the same code anymore. But let's have a look at that piece of code. So Symfony has the concept of a firewall. A firewall in Symfony is exactly like a network firewall. Every user, every request will pass through a firewall. Which one? It's a regex. You have a pattern. The first matching pattern wins. So for instance, when you access the profiler, security is totally disabled. That's why you should never deploy your dev environment to production, because everybody can access the profiler. You cannot set any authentication over the profiler. Let's forget about the admin. And then you have the main firewall. By default, it's all. You don't have to give a default pattern there. And it has anonymous true. Anonymous true means that every request go, and they are authenticated as anonymous. So it's something. They are not totally unknown, they are anonymous. That is something you did before, removing the admin firewall. And now we can add a login form, because we want user to be connected on our application. So again, with the maker, you do make auth. It will ask you a few questions. So you want a form login. That's the first choice. But first as in one, second choice actually. You can give it any name. You want to log out, and you will get those files generated and your security YML modified. So I will do it also there. So bin console make auth. Oh, I have to remove the admin firewall also on my end. So make auth. I want a login form authenticator. So any name also, log out. And now we had the main firewall was modified. It added the authenticator there. There is a new security controller. There is a new form authenticator there. So let's dig into that. A small thing. There is again a default value. Can you please add the provider key under main in the firewall configuration and security YML? It will help us for later, because default value can be a little bit tricky. So you had provider, app user provider, or whatever name it was given on third line. So let's go to the authenticator. On your computer, you can open the authenticator class, which was opened, which was generated. So that's a guard authenticator. Guard is something which was introduced in Symfony 2.8, I think, and it really made working with the security easier. You have some interface, which is authenticator interface. By implementing those eighth method, you can support any authentication method, like form login, certificate, JSON web token, etc. You just have 8 methods to implement. Let's go through. The first one is supports. That one is called on every unauthenticated request, which should be authenticated. So, can we do something with that request? Well, it returns a Boolean. Second one is get credential. If we support that request, can we read credentials inside? And then you return an array with those credentials. So typically for the form login, that's username, password you have in post body in your request. Once you have a username and password, Symfony calls getUser. So getUser should be getting a user interface. Do you remember that? Every user in Symfony has to be a user interface. So can you please get a user interface from the username and eventually password I'm giving you from the credentials? So it should return a user interface, a user in our case, or null. If it is null, it will fail. There will be authentication failure. Check credentials typically is where you will compare the password. Now we have some credentials, we have some user, so you want to compare the password you got in the form login with the user. Symfony Security was made really to have some user with username password authentication. For some system, that method is not useful. Then you do nothing. You just return true if it is good, and if you return false, it's causing authentication failure. Exactly, if you get some authentication failure, that method will be called. What should we be doing? Typically, for form login, you want to redirect the user to the same page, maybe with some error message. If you are doing some authentication of an API, then maybe you will give them a 403. So you can return a response or null, meaning the user is not authenticated and nothing will happen. It will be a silent failure. On the opposite, after successful authentication, that method is called. So if you are doing a form login authentication, typically you want to redirect the person to another page. So it can be to the administration, it can be to the home page, or it can be to the page which was visited before the login was caused. Then you can read referrer and redirect the person. Support remember me is just a Boolean. Symfony implemented the remember me mechanism with the cookie once and for all. So you just have to say support remember me or not, true, false. And the last method is not from authenticator interface, it's coming from another interface. The name is not really clear, it's called start. That method actually is called when you have an user, an HTTP request, which should be authenticated, but which is not authenticated. We could not support it. And then what should happen? Typically, in that case, you want to redirect the person to login form. So if you compare what I told you with the code you had of the form login authenticator, you will see those methods are implemented and are doing what I describe at every step. let's go exactly to the form login authenticator, and you had a to-do. The maker bundle wrote to-do in authentication success, because the maker bundle cannot infer what you want to do with the user after they are connected. So typically, you want to, in our case, we want to redirect the user to the admin. So we can just go and edit that. I'm opening my authenticator, and there you see you have a to-do, and it is throwing some exception. So we remove that, and after the user is successfully connected, we want them to go, for instance, to the admin page. There. And now you can go to the application from before. And you go to the login route, or /login. And you can connect with any of the user you created. So in my case, I created with my email and my secret password. And I've got a working login form. To know that the login form is working, you can have a look at the debug toolbar there, and you will see that you are logged in as your user authenticated yes. So then it is successful. So if you don't have any issues, let's recap. We did a guard authenticator to handle the login, meaning to display the form, to redirect the user, to check the password. You had a user provider generated by Symfony. So I show you rapidly before those lines. Those lines means you can fetch the user from the database. Because in pretty much every application, it's the same. You go fetch the user from the database or so. So Symfony coded those for you, and most of the time you don't have to implement the user provider. So just with those lines, you are telling the security to go fetch the user from the database with the email field as username. And we have a password encoder. That's the thing we used while loading features, which is used to hash password. Symfony needs to know how to hash password. You can see that it is declared by entity class name. So you can have different encoder for different entities. But again, there you don't have anything to code. It's just a little bit of configuration. Symfony, they're using the different PHP methods behind. You don't have to implement yourself bcrypt or anything. So just using those three concepts, you can do some authentication. And now you know those three concepts, I will ask you to do yourself an authenticator, a guard, etc. to use those. So you saw before we had some API. The API is open. Everybody can read all blog and all articles. So imagine that data is premium data, and the company wants to make some mobile application. Then you want to have some authorization, so only your mobile application can read a blog content. Then we'll implement some really simple authentication with some authorization header. Nothing fancy for now, no GSM token or just a header. So what do we need to do? First, to need a new firewall over API. That firewall can be, or well, it does not have to be, but it can be stateless true. It means that it does not need a session, because for API, every request will be with the header, with the authentication header. So you set stateless true. You can set anonymous true temporarily if you want to use a maker bundle, because there is some issue in the maker bundle which will prevent it from being used if you don't do that. But it is just a workaround. Don't keep that. A new user provider. So how would you do to store API keys? I lost you. So API keys don't have to be attached to any specific user. They can be just hard-coded in the config for now. So that's what we will do. And Symfony has a user provider called in-memory, which is doing exactly that. It allows you to hard-code in config or in environment variables some credentials for something you don't need to have it stored in the database. You can set any password encoder because API keys, they just have a username, they don't have any password, but still you are forced to set a password encoder. And you add a new guard authenticator. And finally, there was some API test. So once you added, the authentication should be failing. So you will have to modify the API test to get it working with the authorization header. So please try to do that. Try to give you every step. I'm letting you started. I think we can take at least 15 minutes for that. That's one of the main concepts. If you are lost somehow, don't hesitate in calling me, or you can have a peek at the 3 API auth branch, which has a working code. Oh, and there is something I forgot to tell you. If you look at the README of the project, there in the README files, this morning I made some gist of all the code in my slide, because in some slides there are a lot of code and it's not quite easy to read. So if you want to see the commented authenticator, you can go to the first link. And also there is some documentation which will be useful later for code katas, etc. So please use those. Also, there is a page which would be useful. There. I forgot to put the link of that, but you go to Symfony documentation for user providers, and you have a small snippet of code about memory user provider. Is everybody fine on those, or some people are getting a little bit lost? Or is it I still have everybody on track? Do not hesitate to say anything. That's fine. I think I will get the first item started in front of you. We'll do those together. And then you can continue implementing the guard by yourself. So, as a quick reminder, what we want to do is to secure the API. So that. Then the first thing to do is to add a firewall over the API. So I'm calling that one that way, API. I'm giving a regex which will match every API route. I'm adding the small stateless not to have a session started. No big deal if you don't remember that. And that's the workaround to have the guard working. Now you need to have the user provider. So let's have a peek at Symfony documentation. They're displaying us how to have a memory user provider. A memory user provider is you just give a list of username and password in your config file. So let's do that. So I'm calling that API user provider, for instance. Then it's memory, user. And because it is an API key, I just need a username. So let's call that secret API key. And I don't need any password, role, or anything there. Password encoder, Symfony forces us to have a password encoder. So they are giving us exactly what we need to put there. So to recap, now we have firewall, user provider, password encoder. Now we can start on the guard. I will just do the first step and you will continue each of you on your computer. You use again make auth command. Oops, what is telling me? Not going. Yeah, I forgot to put the small provider key told you about there and there. Now that we have multiple user provider, it can be Symfony need to know which one to use for which firewall. So those two I did. And now we can use guard. So you want some empty authenticator, which we'll call API authenticator, and API firewall. And now you have that class you can customize to read the header. So I'm letting the config there. Any question asked? So Ivo just told me there is coffee which is ready. Do you want to have a look at the code of the guard right now or after the coffee break? Okay, so let's have the coffee break. And we start again at 3:10. And then I will show you the code from the branch. We'll have a quick putting it together, and we will move to the second part about authorization. Thank you. Okay, so let's get started again. You can check out the branch number 3, which is called 3 API Auth. Let's take a quick look at the code of the Guard Authenticator before continuing. So for support method, we check if it has some header. Then we read those credentials. We use the user provider, which is really straightforward. And on success, we just let the request continue. What's specific about API authentication is that it will be called on every request. So you don't have any login page or anything to redirect user. Either the header on a request is good, either it's not, and then you throw a forbidden HTTP error. Okay, so let's move to the second part, which is a little bit smaller than the first one, authorization. So authentication was about who I am, connecting user. Authorization is about what can a user do. In Symfony, every user has a role. So the basic one you can find in your user class is role user. Pretty much everyone has role user. And after, you can add any role. So it has to start by role. Usually you have role admin, role super admin, etc. Most of the time, you want roles to be hierarchical. Sorry. Meaning that a role admin includes role user. You don't want to have to give to anyone role user, role admin, role, etc. You want to have a hierarchy. So admin has user role, meaning that they can do anything a user can do. So Symfony has a tool for that called role hierarchy. That's just a little bit of configuration in the YML file. And then if you give someone role admin, they will automatically be granted anything from role user. There are also 3 specific roles. That's something a little bit weird in Symfony. But when you're authenticated, you get some role from the firewall. Because sometimes in your code, you need to know how the user was authenticated. So do you remember the anonymous firewall? Anyone which went through the anonymous firewall get the who's authenticated anonymously. They are not a role user, because they are not a role user, but they still get a role. And then if someone is logged in with a remember me cookie, they get is authenticated remembered. And if someone goes through a login form, they will get on top of role user is authenticated fully role. Just a little bit of weirdness of the security component, which may change in Symfony 5 or 6. Even worse, those roles are hierarchical, meaning that someone who is authenticated fully, they also get is authenticated anonymously and is authenticated remembered. Again, that's a hierarchy. Okay, so let's get started with authorization. The easiest method is in the config file in access control, which is usually at the bottom of the file. There you can define a pattern, exactly like the firewall actually. And with the pattern, for instance, on /admin, you can require user to have a role. That part of the security is called really early in the HTTP request. It's called even before routing. So that's why you are using a path, a regex, and not even a route. At that point, you don't have any routing or anything. Anything that starts by /admin, user will be required to be authenticated and to have role admin. The first rule wins. So you should read actually that from bottom to top. You can add some check by IP host. Sometimes that's useful. Most of the time that's a little bit tricky. And you can even require HTTPS there. If you have some application where you cannot use any h.cs or modify the server config, you can that way force HTTPS with the Symfony. That's a nice possibility. Not super useful, but can do. In a controller, you can also check the role of a user. So the traditional method is to get security authorization checker, protocol is granted. So I'm checking if user has role admin, otherwise I'm throwing some exception. There is a shortcut in controllers if you extend abstract controller, so deny access unless granted. It's exactly equivalent, so you can pick any. Authorization checker is your service, so you can access it anywhere, and anywhere in your code you can check if user has a specific role. In Twig also, that's nice when you want to display the name of the user, or if you want to display login or logout link, typically. If user is connected, you display logout. If user is not connected, you can display login link. So you have a small is-granted function. And in the controller, again, you can use some annotation, because you saw that using the service is a little bit verbose. So then that way, you have security annotation, or is granted. The two lines there are exactly equivalent. And again, you can check for which role as a user. Something really interesting with the annotation is that you can use expression language. So if you have a blog object passed to your request, to your action, you can access the blog object and compare it with the user. So for instance, that annotation, check if user is role admin, and if the blog is editing, is a blog he owns. So that's a quick way to write things. So I will ask you to implement what we saw in those 3 slides in the application. Now we have a login, we have users. They can go through the login form. So add, please, a role hierarchy. Restrict admin route through firewall to admin only. And also in blog edit and article edit, please add the annotation so you check that the user is an admin and that he's editing some blog he owns or the article of a blog he owns. So I'm letting you do that. If you need to see one of the previous slides to copy code, ask me. And as a bonus, you can also toggle the login logout link using the twig function is granted. Okay, so we will continue. You can check out the branch number 4 if you want to check out code, but then you should have something like in block controller. We are checking exactly as in the previous slide. And also in article controller. Still, you can think that writing your access control rules inside some security annotation is not super clean. So now we'll see a better way to do things. That better way is called a voter. So we will start together so you can follow with me. I'm on the number 4 branch. And again, I will be using maker bundle. So this time, maybe I will clear so it's easier to read. I'm using the make voter command, like this. I will start by blog voter. It generated a class in SRC security voter blog voter. A voter is a really simple class which has 2 methods: support, vote, and attribute. When you do is granted, behind the scene, Symfony will go fetch all voters, and every voter it will call support, and if it can vote, it will ask the voter to take a decision, meaning true if the user is granted what you're asking, or false. So we can refactor to remove that piece of logic from the annotation to a voter. Exactly that one. So support, you have to decide on what you want to vote. So I decided to create a can edit attribute. You can set anything. You don't have to have a role or anything. Actually, that's better not to reuse role. So I want to decide on can edit, and subject has to be a blog. And then, if I'm asking is granted can edit with the blog, that method would be called. So we have a switch, but actually we support only can edit attribute for now. And then I will return true if the blog, so subject, owner is my user. So blog get owner get ID is equal to user get ID. By the way, do you know if we can do, or if we should do, that or that? Which one do you prefer? Do you prefer to compare object or to compare IDs? So in theory, the second line is better. It's better to compare the identity, the ID, than to compare the object. Because you could have 2 objects in theory. You could have 2 users with the same ID. In practice, when you use doctrine has some cache mechanism, and you will have only one entity, one PHP object for every ID in the application. Entities that are shared inside doctrine. So you will always have the same PHP object, the same reference to user with the ID number 1 or number 2 in your request. But still, that's better to compare the exact ID. So there, I've got a voter which can decide if someone can edit a blog post. And then now, I can refactor there and ask instead if my user can edit this blog post. So I'm still using isGranted. I'm passing the attribute I decided and the object, which will be passed to my voter to the subject attribute. So then please use the same command and do the same code, but with an article voter instead of a blog voter. So a voter which can decide if someone can edit some article. That's pretty much the same code you have to do. And if you are blocked or curious, you can check out branch number 5. So it all starts by bin console make voter. You make the voter and then you modify the security annotation. Okay, is everybody all right with the voter? So if you want to check out the code for the article voter, which is super similar to the blog voter, you can check out branch number 5. You see that voters are really flexible. They are a piece of code you add which can vote on any attribute, any subject. They will be called if they support it. But that system of voter which can vote on anything actually is too flexible. Symfony is really giving you some unopinionated structure and you can do anything. It is not helping you with any attributes or anything. So it is up to you to decide yourself or in your team which attributes do you need in your application and then which voter do you need. And you don't have any way, like programmatically, ways of enforcing it with the Symfony. It will maybe eventually with code reviews or checking from time to time in the code, having someone having a look, that you are not testing for some attribute which does not exist. So system of voter is really powerful, but it's a little bit too flexible. You really need to have some architecture behind on your side. There was something else we did not see. I will be checking out the code there. So so I've got a voter which prevents me from moving to branch. Okay, now I'm on branch number 5. So now I've got some voter in my application or security annotation, and I can edit only a blog I own. But on the admin page, you can still see all blogs. And I can click on edit on every blog, even if I can't do anything on there. So there will be one way in Twig, in the loop, to check for every blog if you are granted edit on that blog and then to display it or not. Do not do that. Calling a voter on every line in a list which may contain dozens or hundreds of blogs will be eventually very slow. Because if you remember the code from the voter, it was triggering some DB request actually through a doctrine proxy. So without getting too technical, it does not scale. So we have to filter that list another way. And this other way, well, Symfony is not helping you at all for that. It's up to you. So basically, what you need to do is in the request in the controller, you get only blogs the user owns and can edit. Symfony Security component is not giving you any tool to filter collection. You just have to manually filter DB request, which is sometimes an issue because a developer can easily forget to filter a list. There is one tool you can use. So that's what I did there. Same on PHP Storm. You can use a doctrine filter. So someone there already used a doctrine filter, or did someone already use doctrine extensions? You never use doctrine extensions, you have to delete, etc. Yeah. So a doctrine filter is a small service which can add a where clause to every DB request. So you can use that system to filter automatically request to blog table to filter by the current user. So it's a little bit of magic. It's not obvious that it is called every time. That's the bad part. The good part is that it is automatic. So you are less prone to forget to filter a DB query if you have a doctrine filter, because it will be filtering every time. I made a gist of that piece of code, and actually you have a little bit of configuration to add, and also you need to set the user parameter, so everything is in a gist. Okay, and now we'll be moving to the last part of the presentation. We saw authentication, authorization. Now, let's see what else we have in the security component. There is something called user checker. So officially, it's part of authentication. It is not really logical. That service is something that Symfony will call every time a user logs in. And then that is a perfect place if you want the really typical and common use case is to have some expiration date on user. Like you have a premium website, people are paying, and then in the user checker, you can check that the user is still valid. So that's the example there. You have check pre-auth, check post-auth, and there you can do any check on the user to accept or decline the authentication. You have something else in the security component, which is, it is that way. It's not linked at all to authentication or authorization. It is CSAF. Did some of you ever heard of cross-site request forgery? Or did any of you had some issues with the Symfony forms and CSAF tokens? Never? So CSAF is something really part of security in general, outside of Symfony security component. It is some attack which is making someone do something they don't want. So imagine you are going to work in the morning, you connect to your application, for instance, the application I was showing you, and then you check your emails. Some hacker could be sending you an email which will make you do a specific request to your application. For instance, they could make you click on a link which will take you to the application and to do some delete. And because you are connected, well, you have the cookie is sent, and you will be deleting a blog. So that's some attack which is a little bit tricky to think of, but it could be really common and really do a lot of harm. Because, for instance, if you use Sonata or EasyAdmin, it's really easy to guess with the Sonata or EasyAdmin how to delete something. It's like /admin, /action delete, entity equals, sorry. So if someone can guess that you are using EasyAdmin on your website, they can forge a link and send the email to everybody in the organization. And some people will click in the email, or maybe have some JavaScript doing the request, or have some images which will load the page, and boom, you are deleting some entity. So it's a pretty big security risk for CSRF. There is a subset of security component which is helping you with that. It helps you create a CSRF token, and you will need to pass that token to do the action. Because the attacker is not able to guess that token, it changes every time, it's random, they are not able to forge a link which would cause anything. They are missing a bit of information. It is something which is absolutely necessary to use for forms, but Symfony form component will do it every time for you. You don't have to handle it. If you are working on some application and you have some delete route, typically you do a get to delete some data. I know it's a bad practice, we should not do it, but everybody does it. Everybody has a /delete something. Well, if you do that, consider manually adding a CSRF token. It's pretty easy to use, and there is the link in the README of that component. You have a small helper. It's easy to do. So we are getting to the code kata. For that part, it will be about 20-25 minutes. I suggest you to work on one of those ideas. You don't have to work on everything, and you have difficulty. So first suggestion is to finish securing the application. Maybe I was going a little bit too fast before. And to add a doctrine filter to automatically filter requests. So check out the README of the application. There you can find a link to the gist I mentioned earlier. If you want to use a user checker, you can try to implement a user checker to handle some expiration date of a user. And if you feel like tackling something complex, you can try to do some rate limiting. So it will mean modifying the guard and in the guard authenticator, you can trigger some event and then check if the user is trying too much to log in or not. Or you can also warn user after they connected if their password are compromised. So I don't know if some of you saw the news on Symfony.com, but in Symfony 4.3, you have a new validator which is calling Have I Been Pwned API. And that API is able to tell you if the password someone is using may have been compromised in a data leak. And then you can warn the user that his password is compromised, that you should change that. So you can try that one. So you have 25 minutes about, and then we'll be doing the quiz just before the end. Again, you have, so that's just the outline of what to do, some ideas. If you feel like working on something else, you can, and ask me any question. And in the README of the project, you have link to every documentation and to some gist which are useful to do the katas. So until 4:20, we'll be passing around, and Any question, please ask. Okay, let's move to the quiz because there is the conference after, so we have to finish quite on time. Would you like to have some solution for every kata? I was not planning to publish code, but do you like having every kata solution? Yes? Okay. And then I will do that. I will push some new branches, and then I will add maybe on Slack. I will tell you which branch you can look for each kata. I believe the two last, the rate limiting and the compromise password, can be pretty useful. So let's move to the quiz. On your computer or on your mobile phone, you have to go to count.it. You go to count.it and you have to enter that PIN. And I told you it's a quiz with a lot of prices, and you may wonder, what are the prices? So for the first one, you will have a big chunk of Switzerland, of sweet chocolate. For the second one, you will have a smaller chunk of chocolate. And for the third one, what do you get? Try to guess. A small chunk of chocolate. So those are the prices. And there will be questions, you will see. You have to answer, and you have to answer as quickly as possible, because the fastest, the more points you get. So let's get started. And you have to click as quickly as possible. What is the first object from security component triggered by incoming request? Every question had the answer in the presentation before. So everybody said firewall, almost everybody. That's great. Entry point is pretty close, actually, because the first thing the firewall will be calling is the entry point. Let's move to the next question. Oh, and we have scores every time. So who is Ludwig? Ludwig? Oh, yes, you are taking the lead. There is still a pretty big gap, but it can change quickly. If you are really, really fast, you get a huge score. So, prepare. Next question. What is the name of the object responsible for reading authentication information? Can someone tell me what is told about? The green one? That was the small Mario character on the side. So no one said Toad. Good. Still, it will be hard to have different scores, a lot of different answers. Ludwig still on the edge. Perfect. Marek, I think you can make it. And yeah, you have 3 people that are really close. Which method from Guard authenticator validates user password. That's an easy one. Check credentials. A lot of you fall for the trap, check password. Hopefully, they do not quite use password wording anymore because sometimes it's a little bit ambiguous. So, do we still have Lugwid? Oh, Marek! Congratulations. Going well. And Daniel. Daniel is on fire. Who is Daniel? Good. And you have a streak. So if you continue on your streak, you may get the first prize. You have a huge bonus after. Next question. How do we prevent security component from starting a session? That's something I said, but pretty quickly. So maybe it is a chance to differentiate yourself. 10 answers. Status. Oh, congratulations. All. Marek. With FebZ. With it. You can still make it. You are really close. I'm sorry, Daniel, you ended your streak. Maybe next time. Next question. I mean, it's not lost. One, not halfway. You can still make it. Which role is given to any connected user? Six answers. Some adopting. Yeah. 10 answers. Okay. That was a trap. Role user is there by default, but you can override it, actually. It's just a default, and kind of traditionally. What is given to every single authenticated user is given by the firewall, and that's one of the famous firewall role, which is authenticated something. So that was the green one. So not much change for now. Which other role is given to any authenticated user? I think that's the worst question so far. I can see it getting harder. Actually, there are two correct answers because you have is authenticated fully, which includes is authenticated remember me, which is the cookie, and which also include is authenticated anonymously. So there are two correct answers. So again, it's changing. It's good because we have a lot of suspense now. 7. In Symfony 4, which service can you use to check if user is a given role? Role voter, security contest, authorization checker, or is granted? Actually, there was a trick. So security contest was used in Symfony 2, and now it's gone. Role voter is the underlying abstraction. You never use role voter directly. You use authorization checker. And is granted is the name of the method and not of the service. So the one with the correct answer will have a huge boost, I think. Okay, we don't know who it is. So Marek, still number 1. FabZ, good. Daniel, you can still make it, I think. Sebastian F. Piccolo, I don't know if you can catch on, because you are getting to the question number 8. Almost over. which other annotation can you use to handle authorization of controller actions? Everybody answers. Oh, that was quick. Okay, who said secure? Actually, that was kind of a trap question because secure is something which was used by GMS security bundle, which is kind of deprecated because now you have security annotation in SensorLab framework extra bundle, so we don't really use it anymore. But at some point, it was correct. Really, in Symfony, it is granted our security. So Marek, getting good for you. Last question, I think FabZ can still make it. Which method can you implement in a user checker? Actually, that's before last question, actually. So still 2 questions. It was a code snippet on the screen. I didn't read it aloud. So actually there were 2 methods, one before check pre-auth and one after. Marek will be, FabZ can still make it. I think we're keeping pretty much the same ranking. Last question. Sysof means, so you have to be fast there. I should have put less than 20 seconds there. That was last and really easy question. Pretty much everybody got it right. It was an acronym, so that's pretty easy to see the order. So Marek in number 1. Congratulations. And you can come get your Swiss Toblerone. Number 2, FabZ. Congratulations. And actually, for everybody else, you can get. So you can pass by after, fetch those, and putting in there. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope you enjoyed this workshop and you learned some new stuff about security component. You can keep in touch on Twitter. I will post the slides over there and on the Slack channel. So we'll also post details about on the code catalog, about the solutions. Enjoy the rest of Web Summer Camp. Thank you.